my previous video, I shared a trip that I made to Honeycombs Beach, down in the southwest of Western Australia. It was the first time I'd been to this location to shoot some landscape photography, and I found the beach really interesting, but I didn't find a strong composition that I was happy with. So I think the sun is either setting right now or it sets in a couple of minutes. And unfortunately, those clouds have really closed up around where the sun is setting, and it's really blocking out most of the light and the colour in the sky. So the colour is a little bit flat, the light is a little bit flat. You can check out that video using the link in the top corner of this video. The next day, I was still in the area, so I decided to go back to Honeycombs Beach to see if I could find a better composition. So it's the next day, and I've come back to the same beach. This is still Honeycombs Beach. For a bit more of an explore, the more you come back, the more you are familiar with the location, and the greater the chances are that you can pick out a better composition. I've come back to that same end. I'm in the rocks at the moment, and I keep on getting drawn to the rocks with the green moss on them. So tonight I'm going to try and shoot an image just behind me. There's a couple of green rocks that are in the foreground, but they're not going to be very close to the camera. You might be able to see behind me how rough the sea is. The waves are certainly much bigger than tonight than they were last night. And the water is coming up a lot further up the beach and into the rocks as well. So I've just got to be really careful. I've also got to be careful about some of the rocks have got that black slime on them. And if you put your foot on it, it's like ice. I've already fallen over once, slipped over once. I don't want to do it again, break my neck. So the sun has just gone behind a thin line of cloud which is sitting right on the horizon. So we're pretty much at sunset. There's hardly any cloud or any other cloud in the sky, so there's not going to be any beautiful sunset colours. So before the next wave comes in, I'll just take you quickly through my setup. I've got the 14 to 30 on the Z7. I've got a polarizer there, and that's taking off the glare in the water, which is just in front of me. It is taking off the glare on the wet rocks, also in front of me. And any of the green rocks that are in front of me, that polarizer is really giving that green a nice punch, which is good. As well as the polarizer, I've also got a 0.9 hard graduated filter, and it's a hard grad because it's lined up with the horizon, which is nice and flat. Sorry, mozzies are going to carry me away. Whew. So I'm much happier with this composition than I was with the one last night. This is far stronger. It's got a really strong foreground. The patterns and the colours in the foreground are beautiful. I've got the water coming into this little area, and then it pushes through to the left-hand side. And on the right, I've got this main boulder, which is covered in moss, which is going to just look fantastic, I reckon, in the image in the foreground. So when I set up, my settings were ISO 64, as always. I've got a shutter speed of ½ a second. Now, I usually try and get it around about ½ a second to 1/3 of a second. I've gone with ½ a second because the amount of distance that the water has to travel, it's a fair distance. So I want to give it ½ a second to be able to give it plenty of time for that water to move through and capture those lines in amongst the green rocks. I might even pump it up to 2/3 or even a full second once the sun dips down. As it's getting darker and darker, I'm having to open up my aperture to get just a little bit more light on that sensor. There's a bit of a pause, so I'll show you what that composition looks like. So I'm all set up, I'm ready to go. I've focused on a green rock just in the foreground there, and now it's just a matter of waiting for the right wave with the right amount of water. As it gets darker and darker, I'm just opening up my aperture slightly again. The good thing is that I haven't got anything really close to the camera, so even an aperture of 7.1 or 6.3 is going to be fine. Way off in the distance, the only objects that are there are the moving waves, and so they're going to be slightly blurry anyway. So the main focus for this particular image is to make sure that the rocks in the foreground are nice and sharp. So that's where I'm focusing on. The main difference between these two images was the shutter speed. I took the first image at half a second, which captured the energy of the water as it bursts through the rocks. I shot the second image a few minutes later, when there was a little less light, so I could have the shutter open for over 3 times longer at 1.6 of a second, creating more of a flowing effect with the water. I decided to edit these images slightly differently as well, giving the first image a cooler feel in comparison to the warmer tones I emphasised in the second image. Besides that, I pretty much treated both images the same, making sure that the patterns and lines that were formed by the water moving through the rocks were enhanced by going over the foam with a brush that slightly increased the exposure and the whites. The green of the moss growing on the rocks certainly popped, so much so that I had to be a little bit careful about the greens not looking too intense and fake. I do this in a couple of different ways. First, I make sure that I don't increase the vibrancy of the image too much. In fact, I decrease the saturation of the green channel slightly. Plus, I added a touch of yellow with the brush tool and the radial tool to some of the areas, just to bring in a variation of colour, and I like this effect. This composition has a natural vignette to it, with the darker rocks surrounding the lighter white water in the centre, so I didn't feel as if I needed to darken the edges any further. Instead, I simply lightened the centre of the image with the radial tool, so the effect drops off towards the edge of the image. I'd regard this as a better composition to the images that I took in my previous video, as I'm not relying on the light to make it a strong image. Pretty dark. I stayed through till the last of the light, but pretty much the blue hour is finished, and as you can see behind me, it's pretty much pitch black, so I've got to make my way back to the car now. I'm really happy with the compositions that I managed to get. Of course, this is the second day that I was down at Honeycombs Beach. It really is a beautiful beach, and I'm going to make sure that I come down again. I think if this video is to have any lesson, it's the fact that the more you come down to a location, the more you become familiar with it, and the higher the chance that you will find a composition that you're happy with, that makes the image that you're capturing stronger. So I will definitely be back again. So this video is quite a short one. It really is part 2 of my previous video, so if you haven't seen that, I suggest you go back and check that out. If you enjoyed this video or any of the images, please give the video a like. It really does help the channel out. If you want to see more content like this, then consider subscribing and make sure you hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload my next video. But until then, thanks very much for watching.